Ever wonder how a family goes from roaming the desert to owning a $335 billion investment fund? That's the story of Qatar's Al Thani family. They turned their tiny Gulf state into the richest country per capita in the world. But how'd they do it? Oil and gas, sure, but there's way more to this rags to riches tale. We're talking about a family that went from Bedouin tents to building entire cities from scratch. And trust me, you won't believe some of the crazy stuff they've bought along the way. From sand to skyscrapers, the Al Thani's humble beginnings. Picture this, a family living in tents, herding camels across the scorching desert. That was the Al Thanis not too long ago. Yeah, the same family that now owns skyscrapers and billion-dollar companies started out as Bedouin nomads. They'd move with the seasons, just trying to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But in 1868, everything changed. The Al Thanis took control of Qatar, which back then was just a tiny peninsula sticking out into the Persian Gulf. It wasn't exactly prime real estate, you know. Qatar was dirt poor and people there made a living diving for pearls or fishing. The Al Thanis weren't living much different from everyone else. They had a bit more power, sure, but they weren't exactly rolling in cash. Here's the crazy part, though. They were sitting on a gold mine and didn't even know it. Well, not gold exactly, but something even better in the modern world, oil. And we're not talking about a little bit of oil. Qatar had enough black gold to make the Al Thanis richer than their wildest dreams. In 1939, they struck oil for the first time. Can you imagine what that must have been like? One day you're worried about where your next meal's coming from. The next you're suddenly in control of one of the most valuable resources on the planet. It's like winning the lottery, but instead of a few $1,000,000, you win an entire country's worth of oil. The Al Thanis' fortunes were about to change forever. They went from herding camels to controlling oil fields practically overnight. But getting the oil out of the ground and turning it into cash, that's a whole other story. The Al Thanis had to figure out how to go from desert nomads to oil barons real quick. And that's exactly what they did. They took all that oil money and started transforming Qatar from a backwater into a modern nation. We're talking about building entire cities from scratch, constructing world-class universities, and creating one of the most influential media networks in the Middle East. But how'd they do it? How'd the Al Thanis turn all that black gold into the glittering skyscrapers and insane luxury we see in Qatar today? That's what we're going to talk about next. Because trust me, the story of how they built their oil empire is even crazier than how they found it in the first place. Black Gold Rush, how oil changed everything. You thought finding oil was a game changer? Wait till you hear how the Al Thanis handled their newfound wealth. Imagine going from living in tents to controlling a country's entire oil industry practically overnight. How'd they manage that transition without everything falling apart? Well, in 1949, Qatar shipped its first load of oil, and suddenly the Al Thanis were playing with the big boys. We're talking serious cash flowing into this tiny desert nation. And you know what? The Al Thanis didn't just sit on all that money. Nah, they started transforming Qatar from a backwater into a powerhouse. They built schools where there were none before. Hospitals popped up left and right. Modern roads replaced dusty tracks. Qatar was changing so fast you could practically see it happen before your eyes. One day it's all sand and camels, the next it's skyscrapers and luxury cars. But hey, it wasn't all smooth sailing. You know how it goes when there's suddenly a ton of money on the table. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. Other members of the Al Thani family started eyeing that oil wealth. They weren't about to let a few cousins hog all the good stuff. Things got so tense that in 1972, Khalifa bin Hamad Al Thani decided enough was enough. He took over in a bloodless coup. Dude promised to share the wealth more fairly. Smart move, right? Keep the family happy, keep the oil flowing. Under Khalifa, Qatar's oil industry went into overdrive. They joined OPEC in 1961, hanging out with the cool kids of the oil world. By the 1980s, Qatar was pumping out over 500,000 barrels of oil every single day. That's a lot of black gold, my friends. The Al Thanis were getting richer by the second. But here's the kicker. Oil was just the beginning for Qatar. Yeah, it made them rich, but the Al Thanis had another ace up their sleeve. Something that would make their oil wealth look like chump change. See, while everyone else was focused on oil, the Al Thanis were playing the long game. They knew oil wouldn't last forever, so they started looking for the next big thing, and boy did they find it. But that's a story for another time. For now, just imagine being part of this family. One day you're herding goats in the desert, the next you're deciding how to spend billions of dollars. Talk about a crazy ride, right? The Al Thanis went from zero to hero faster than you can say black gold. And trust me, they were just getting started. The gas gamble. betting big on LNG. Just when you thought the Al Thanis couldn't get any richer, they decided to roll the dice on a massive underground treasure. But this high-stakes gamble had a catch. The technology to cash in didn't even exist yet. Would their billion-dollar bet pay off, or would it bankrupt the nation? In 1971, Qatar stumbled upon something huge, the North Field. This wasn't just any old gas field. Nah, this was the biggest natural gas reservoir in the world. We're talking about enough gas to power the entire planet for years. But there was a problem, a big one. See, all that gas was stuck under the Persian Gulf. Qatar had no way to get it out and sell it. The tech to turn natural gas into liquid so it could be shipped around the world. It didn't exist yet. Most people would have just left that gas where it was, not the Al Thanis. These guys decided to bet big, like billions of dollars big. They poured money into developing liquefied natural gas, LNG technology. It was crazy risky. If it didn't work, Qatar could have gone broke. For years, nothing happened. People started talking. They said the Al Thanis had lost their minds, wasting the country's oil money on some pipe dream. But the Al Thanis didn't give up. They kept pushing, kept spending, and in 1997 it finally paid off. Qatar shipped its first LNG cargo. Suddenly all that gas under the Gulf was worth something, a lot of something. Qatar went from zero to hero in the gas world. They became the biggest LNG exporter on the planet. The Al Thanis wealth? It exploded. We're talking Scrooge McDuck swimming in money levels of rich. By 2010, Qatar's GDP per person hit $145,000. That's the highest in the world. Think about that. The average person in Qatar was making more than top executives in most countries. All because the Al Thanis took a crazy gamble on gas. Now the family's got more money than they know what to do with. And trust me, they're trying real hard to spend it. Palaces, supercars, private jets, you name it, they're buying it. The Al Thanis went from desert nomads to some of the richest people on earth in just a couple generations. But all that cash comes with its own problems. When you're that rich, everyone wants a piece of you. And the Al Thanis, they're about to find out that money can't solve everything. Spending sprees, the Al Thanis' lavish lifestyle. You've heard of millionaires, but what about people so rich they make millionaires look broke? The Al Thanis aren't just buying stuff, they're buying entire landmarks. Think you know what expensive means? You might want to think again. With billions rolling in from oil and gas, the Al Thanis started spending big. And I mean really big. These guys ain't messing around with small change. They're snapping up properties all over the world like they're playing Monopoly. But their favorite playground? That's London, baby. In 2015, they dropped $1.3 billion on Dudley House in London. That's not a typo. Billion with a B. It's the most expensive private home in the UK. But for the Al Thanis, that's just a starter home. They spent $6.5 billion on Harrods, the famous department store. Yeah, they bought the whole store, because when you're that rich, why just shop at Harrods when you can own it? But houses and stores are boring. Let's talk about their car collection. The Al Thanis got hundreds of the world's most expensive rides. We're talking about a $4.8 million Lamborghini Veneno Roadster. That's a car so rare and expensive, most billionaires can't even get their hands on one. But for the Al Thanis, it's just another toy in their garage. And don't even get me started on their yachts. The Al Mirkab is a floating palace worth $300 million. It's got everything from a cinema to a helicopter pad. This thing is so big and fancy it makes most luxury cruise ships look like rubber duckies. But the Al Thanis ain't just about cars and boats. They're into art too. They spent $250 million on a single Cézanne painting. That's more than some countries' entire art budgets. For them, it's just another pretty picture to hang on the wall. Here's the thing though, the Al Thanis ain't just buying expensive toys. They're buying influence. All these purchases, they're making the family major players in business, art and high society around the world. It's like they're playing a real-life game of Risk, using their cash to spread their power globally. So next time you think you've spent too much on a shopping spree, just remember, somewhere out there, an Al Thani is probably buying an entire shopping mall. And they're just getting started. Power players. The Al Thanis on the world stage. Shopping sprees are cool and all, but the Al Thanis have their sights set on something much bigger. How does a family go from ruling a small desert nation to influencing global affairs? It's a wild ride that'll make your head spin. See, the Al Thanis ain't satisfied with just being rich. They want power too. Real power. The kind that shapes world events. In 2005, they set up the Qatar Investment Authority. This thing's got $335 billion to throw around. That's more money than some countries' entire economies. What are they doing with all that cash? Buying up pieces of the world's biggest companies. They've got stakes in Volkswagen, Barclays, and even the Empire State Building. Yeah, that Empire State Building. The Al Thanis own a piece of the New York skyline. But they're not just into boring business stuff. In 2011, they bought Paris Saint-Germain, one of France's top football clubs. Suddenly, Qatar's a big deal in the sports world. They're signing superstars like Neymar and Mbappe for hundreds of millions. It's like they're playing FIFA in real life, but with actual money. The Al Thanis know information is power too. That's why they launched Al Jazeera back in 1996. It's not just a TV channel, it's Qatar's voice to the world. They're shaping how people see the Middle East and beyond. And get this, the family's even messing around in other countries' politics. They're backing groups in Syria and Libya. It's like they're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. But their biggest move, winning the bid to host the 2022 FIFA World Cup. That's right, the biggest sporting event in the world is happening in tiny Qatar. It's cost them billions, but it's put Qatar on the map like never before. The Al Thanis have gone from ruling a patch of desert to being major players on the world stage. They've got their fingers in everything from sports to media to global politics. It's an insane amount of influence for such a small country, but here's the thing. All this power comes at a price. People are asking questions. How'd Qatar really win that World Cup bid? What's with all the political meddling? And don't even get me started on the human rights issues. The Al Thanis might be living large, but they're finding out that being a global power player ain't all private jets and billion-dollar deals. Sometimes it means the whole world's watching your every move, and not everyone likes what they see. The dark side of wealth, controversies and criticisms. The whole world's watching and they're not loving the show. Think the Al Thanis' golden touch turns everything to riches? Think again. Their empire's got some serious cracks and we're about to peek behind the glitzy curtain. All that cash and power the Al Thanis have been throwing around, it's causing some major headaches. Human rights groups are going after Qatar hard, especially when it comes to how they treat migrant workers. These guys make up most of Qatar's workforce, building all those fancy skyscrapers and World Cup stadiums. But their living conditions? Not so fancy. Speaking of the World Cup, that's been a PR nightmare for the Al Thanis. Reports say thousands of workers died building those stadiums. Thousands. The global backlash has been intense. People are asking how a country that rich could let that happen. And it gets worse. There's all these accusations flying around about corruption in Qatar's World Cup bid. FIFA's not happy, and neither are football fans around the world. But the Al Thanis' problems don't stop at sports. Their meddling in Middle East politics is raising eyebrows too. They've been backing certain groups in places like Syria and Libya. Some folks are saying Qatar's playing with fire, getting involved in conflicts they shouldn't be touching. Even at home, things ain't all rosy. Not all Qataris are thrilled with how the Al Thanis run things. Sure, they're rich, but that wealth isn't spread out evenly. Some people are grumbling that the royal family's hogging all the good stuff. And let's not forget about the environment. Qatar's got a carbon footprint the size of Godzilla thanks to all that oil and gas. Environmental groups are slamming the Al Thanis for not doing enough to fight climate change. It's like they're burning cash and the planet at the same time. The Al Thanis are learning a tough lesson. Money can't buy everything, especially not a squeaky clean reputation. All their billions can't silence the critics or make people forget about the dark side of Qatar's success. So yeah, the Al Thanis might have more money than they know what to do with, but they've also got more problems than they can count. It's like they say, mo money, mo problems. And the Al Thanis? They've got a whole lot of both. Family feud, power struggles within the Al Thani clan. Think ruling a country is tough? Try keeping your own family in line when there are billions at stake. The Al Thanis aren't just battling the world's opinion, they're fighting each other. And this royal rumble could change everything for Qatar. On the surface, the Al Thanis look like one big happy family, but peek behind those palace walls, and you'll see a different story. In 1995, Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani decided he'd had enough of daddy's rules. He kicked his old man off the throne in a bloodless coup. No punches thrown, but plenty of family drama. Hamad wasn't messing around. He started modernizing Qatar faster than you can say oil money. New schools, fancy hospitals, shiny skyscrapers, the works. But while Qatar was changing, not everyone in the family was happy about it. Fast forward to 2013 and Hamad drops another bombshell. He hands over power to his son, Tamim. At just 33 years old, Tamim becomes the youngest ruler in the Middle East. It's like he got the keys to the world's richest kingdom before he even hit midlife crisis age. But here's where it gets messy. The Al Thani family's huge, with thousands of members, and not all of them are cool with Tamim running the show. Some of them are feeling left out, watching their cousins live it up while they're stuck on the sidelines. These disgruntled Al Thanis ain't staying quiet. They're causing trouble, spreading rumors, and trying to grab some of that sweet, sweet power for themselves. It's like a real-life Game of Thrones, but with more oil and less dragons. And it's not just about who gets to sit on the fancy chair. The family feud spilling over into business and politics. Some Al Thanis are making deals behind Tamim's back. Others are cozying up to Qatar's rivals, looking for a way to boost their own status. All this family drama's happening while Qatar's facing some serious challenges. The country's under pressure from its neighbors, trying to deal with human rights issues and figuring out how to survive when the oil runs out. Tamim's got to keep Qatar on track while also keeping his family from tearing itself apart. Can he pull it off? That's the million-dollar question. Or in Qatar's case, the billion-dollar question. Tamim's young, but he's got to be smart if he wants to keep his throne and his family together. Because in the Al Thani world, blood might be thicker than water, but oil's thicker than both. And with that much money and power on the line, this family feud ain't ending anytime soon. Building a legacy. The Al Thanis vision for Qatar. You might think having billions in oil money means you can just kick back and relax, but the Al Thanis are doing the opposite. They're pouring insane amounts of cash into projects that sound like science fiction. Ever heard of a $45 billion city built from scratch? The Al Thanis ain't dumb. They know oil and gas won't last forever, so they're planning for Qatar's future, and they're thinking big, real big. They came up with this thing called Qatar National Vision 2030. It's all about making Qatar's economy more than just oil and gas. One of their craziest projects is Education City. They spent $33 billion to bring some of the world's top universities to Qatar. We're talking schools like Georgetown and Cornell setting up shop in the desert. It's like they're trying to turn Qatar into the Ivy League of the Middle East. But that's not all. The Al Thanis are throwing billions at tech startups and AI research. They want Qatar to be a hub for innovation, not just a gas station for the world. They're betting big on the future, hoping some of these investments will pay off big time. And get this, they're trying to make Doha a cultural hotspot too. Qatar Museums is spending crazy money on art and artifacts. They're building museums left and right, trying to turn their capital into the Paris of the Persian Gulf. Sports are still a big deal for the Al Thanis. After hosting the World Cup, they're not stopping. Qatar's going after the 2036 Olympics. Yeah, they want the biggest sporting event in the world to come to a tiny desert country where summer temps hit 120 degrees. Good luck with that, right? But the crown jewel of all their projects, that's Lusail City. This ain't just any city, it's a $45 billion mega project built from the ground up. We're talking about a place for 450,000 people that didn't exist a few years ago. It's got everything from luxury hotels to a fancy stadium that hosted the World Cup final. The Al Thanis are building their legacy and they're sparing no expense. They want Qatar to be more than just another oil-rich country. They're trying to turn it into a global player in education, culture, sports and tech. But here's the million-dollar question, or in Qatar's case, the billion-dollar question. Will all this crazy spending actually work? Can you really buy your way into being a world-class country? The Al Thanis are betting everything that you can. Only time will tell if they're right or if all these mega projects will end up as super expensive ghost towns in the desert. The next generation, future of the Al Thani dynasty. The Al Thanis have been running Qatar for generations, but the next batch of rulers? They're in for a wild ride. Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani's got 13 kids, so the family line ain't dying out anytime soon. But having heirs is one thing. Keeping all that power and cash? That's a whole other ballgame. See, the world's changing fast, and Qatar's smack in the middle of some serious trouble. First up, climate change. It ain't just about saving the polar bears for these guys. By 2070, Qatar might be too hot for humans to live in. Yeah, you heard that right. The whole country could turn into a ghost town if things don't change. Then there's the money problem. Qatar's loaded now, but all that cash comes from oil and gas. And those prices, they're all over the place. One day you're rich, the next you're scrambling to pay the bills on your super yacht. The Al Thanis got to figure out how to make money when the oil wells run dry. But wait, there's more. Qatar's surrounded by some pretty tough neighbors. Saudi Arabia, Iran, you name it. These countries ain't playing nice. And the next generation of Al Thanis needs to be smart about who they make friends with. One wrong move and they could end up in a mess they can't get out of. And let's not forget about the people of Qatar. The young folks there are getting smarter and more connected every day. They've seen how the rest of the world lives and they want in on the action. They're not just going to sit back and let the Al Thanis call all the shots anymore. So what's a young Al Thani to do? They got to be part businessman, part diplomat and part fortune teller. They need to keep the money flowing, keep the neighbors happy, and somehow save their country from turning into a desert wasteland. Oh, and they got to do all this while keeping their own family from fighting over who gets the biggest slice of the pie. It's a crazy balancing act. The next Al Thani rulers need to be tough enough to handle all these problems, but smart enough to know when to change course. They can't just rely on daddy's oil money to fix everything. They gotta come up with new ideas, make new friends, and maybe even give up some of that sweet, sweet power they're used to. Can they pull it off? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, the next generation of Al Thanis ain't gonna have it easy. They're inheriting a country that's rich now, but facing some scary problems down the road. It's gonna take more than a fat wallet to keep Qatar on top. The Al Thanis better be ready, because the future's coming fast, and it ain't waiting for nobody. The price of progress, Qatar's rapid transformation. 50 years ago, Qatar was just sand and camels. Now, it's got skyscrapers that'd make New York jealous. But here's the kicker. For every shiny new building, there's a price tag most people don't see. And it ain't just about money. Qatar's population has exploded faster than a geyser. Foreigners now outnumber Qataris 9-1. That's crazy, right? Imagine walking down the street in your own country and barely hearing your language spoken. It's like the whole place got taken over while no one was looking. And all those fancy buildings, they're burying Qatar's old ways. The Bedouin culture that survived for centuries in the harsh desert is disappearing faster than an ice cube in the sun. Some folks are worried Qatar's losing its soul. Like, what's the point of all this progress if you forget who you are? But it ain't just culture that's taking a hit. Qatar's got the world's highest carbon footprint per person. They're burning through resources like there's no tomorrow. And if they keep it up, there might not be a tomorrow for Qatar. The planet's heating up and Qatar's doing more than its fair share of damage. Now you'd think with all this money floating around, everyone in Qatar would be living large. Wrong. The gap between the rich and poor is growing faster than the country's skyline. While the Al Thanis are buying supercars and private jets, some Qataris are struggling to make ends meet. It's like two different countries living side by side. And don't even get me started on the pressure Qatar's under. They're in a non-stop race with places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. It's like keeping up with the Joneses, but on steroids. Every time one of their neighbors builds something big, Qatar's got to build something bigger. It's exhausting just thinking about it. The Al Thanis are throwing billions at projects that might never make a dime. They're building entire cities from scratch, hoping people will show up. But what if they don't? Qatar could end up with the world's fanciest ghost towns. Sure, the Al Thanis have built something that looks like a miracle in the desert, but can they keep it going? That's the million-dollar question. Or in Qatar's case, the billion-dollar question. They've turned their country into a modern wonderland, but at what cost? And more importantly, how long can they keep the show running before the curtain falls? Global influence, Qatar's soft power strategy. You've seen Qatar's shiny buildings, but that's just the surface. Beneath the glitz, there's a web of influence stretching across the globe. From sports to media to diplomacy, Qatar's fingerprints are everywhere. But can a country of just 2.8 million people really change the world? The Al Thanis ain't just rich, they're smart. They're using Qatar's cash to build something called soft power. It's like being the cool kid in school. Everyone wants to be your friend, but they don't know why. Qatar's become a big deal in global diplomacy. They're jumping into conflicts in places like Sudan and Lebanon, trying to play peacemaker. It's pretty wild when you think about it. This tiny country's sitting at the big table talking to world leaders like it's no big deal. But that's nothing compared to what they're doing with sports. The 2022 World Cup was just the beginning. Qatar's hosting major tournaments left and right. They own Paris Saint-Germain, one of the biggest soccer clubs in the world. It's like they're trying to buy their way into being a sports superpower. And don't even get me started on Al Jazeera. This news channel's giving Qatar a voice that reaches millions. They're shaping how people see the Middle East, and a lot of folks ain't happy about it. But the Al Thanis don't care. They know information is power, and they've got a 24/7 megaphone to the world. The family's spending millions on Western universities too. They're opening campuses in Qatar and funding research all over the place. It's like they're trying to buy brains. Smart move, because who's going to say no to a country that's funding your lab? Even their airline's part of the plan. Qatar Airways ain't just about getting people from A to B. It's a flying billboard for the country. Every time you see one of their planes, it's like Qatar's saying, "Hey, look at us. We're fancy and important." They're even getting into fashion. Qatari brands are going global, and the royal family's always dressed to impress. It's soft power with style, making Qatar look cool on the world stage. But here's the big question. Can a country smaller than Connecticut really change the world? The Al Thanis sure think so. They're spending billions to make Qatar a player in everything from politics to pop culture. It's a crazy gamble, but if it pays off, this tiny desert nation could end up calling the shots on the global stage. And that's pretty wild when you think about it. The Al Thani paradox. Balancing tradition and modernity. Qatar's betting big on global influence, but there's an even bigger challenge brewing at home. The Al Thanis are walking a tightrope between two worlds, and one wrong step could change everything. How long can they keep this delicate dance going? See, the Al Thanis are trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're building cities that look like they're from the future, with skyscrapers that touch the clouds and tech that'd make Silicon Valley jealous. But walk down the street and you'll see people in traditional thobes and abayas. It's like stepping into two different centuries at once. Qatar's got some of the best universities in the world now. They've spent billions bringing in schools like Georgetown and Carnegie Mellon, but Islam still runs deep here. You'll hear the call to prayer 5 times a day, and during Ramadan the whole country slows down. It's a weird mix of Ivy League and Islamic tradition. When it comes to women's rights, Qatar's ahead of some of its neighbors. Women can drive, work, and even run for office. But don't get too excited. Men still call the shots in most places. It's like they've opened the door for women, but only halfway. The Al Thanis are all about the latest tech. They're pouring money into AI, robotics, you name it. But at the same time, tribal traditions are still a big deal. Family connections and old alliances matter just as much as your college degree. It's like they're trying to upload ancient customs to the cloud. Qatar's opening up to the world, but they're keeping a tight grip on the reins. You can get on the internet, but don't expect to see everything. Censorship is real, and there are some topics you just don't talk about. It's like they want to be part of the global conversation, but only if they can control what's being said. The Al Thanis are trying to turn Qatar into a global player. They want a seat at the big table, but they're also looking over their shoulder, making sure they don't tick off the conservative Qataris who aren't so keen on all this change. It's a balancing act that'd make a tightrope walker nervous. So here's the million-dollar question. Can the Al Thanis keep this up? Can they keep pushing Qatar into the future without losing their past? Or is something gonna give? Because right now they're trying to be everything to everyone. And that's a game that's real hard to win. Beyond oil, the Al Thanis plan for a post-carbon future. The Al Thanis aren't just sitting pretty on their oil money. They know the black gold won't flow forever, so they're cooking up plans for a post-oil Qatar. It's like they're trying to build a whole new country before the old one runs out of gas. First up, they're going big on renewable energy. We're talking a massive solar power project that's going to make the desert look like it's covered in mirrors. It's not just about being green, it's about staying rich when the oil wells run dry. But that's just the start. The Al Thanis are betting big on brains. They're pumping cash into research and innovation, trying to turn Qatar into a smarty-pants paradise. It's like they want to swap oil rigs for lab coats. Tourism's another big play. The Al Thanis are dreaming of turning Qatar into the next big vacation spot. They've already got the fancy hotels and the killer skyline. Now they just need to convince people to come to a place where summer temps hit 120 degrees. Sports are still a big deal even after the World Cup. The Al Thanis are hosting everything from tennis tournaments to Formula One races. They're trying to make Qatar the go-to place for anyone who likes watching people run, jump or drive really fast. They're even trying to muscle in on Dubai's turf as a banking hotspot. The Al Thanis are throwing money at financial services, hoping to turn Doha into a place where people come to make deals instead of just changing planes. But here's the thing, it ain't gonna be easy. Right now, oil and gas make up 85% of what Qatar sells to the world. That's a lot of eggs in one basket. The Al Thanis are trying to juggle building a new economy while the old one's still paying the bills. So can they pull it off? Can the Al Thanis turn Qatar from an oil pump into a high-tech, tourist-friendly, sports-crazy banking hub? Or are they going to end up with a bunch of empty skyscrapers in the desert when the oil money runs out? It's a crazy gamble, but the Al Thanis don't have much choice. They're racing against time, trying to build a new Qatar before the old one goes bust. If they win, they'll have turned a tiny desert country into a global powerhouse. If they lose, well, let's just say there's a reason they're working so hard to make this happen.